Hi everyone. This PowerPoint lecture is called Culture of Disability, People First Language, and Disability Etiquette. And what this lecture basically is about is to understand the terminology when it comes to working in the field of disability. All right, so let's put this into context. We all think things that should not be verbalized because we know that they're not respectful. And what I'm talking about specifically are like automatic thoughts that we have. Part of it is from our own experiences, and part of it is from, let's say, growing up and hearing what our culture, our family dictates, and then automatically assuming those things. Although we might know that it's not true, or maybe we do think it's true as well, but we don't actually verbalize it because they're not very respectful. Okay? The key is to recognize these thoughts and act accordingly. For example, if you attend church because you want to, you are entering into a culture that you respect and believe in. So when you choose to study or work in the field of disability, you are entering into a culture that you respect and believe in as well. Okay? So, well, how do you act while you're in church then? Are you polite? Are you considered quote unquote behaving and well mannered because you don't want to be inappropriate in this place of worship? Usually that's what students say when I ask that question. In church, do you sarcastically say, "Oh my God," or "Oh Jesus Christ"? Would you say it in front of a person from the church? Would you say it to these nice six nuns looking at you? Would you correct someone by saying, "Don't use the Lord's name in vain"? Would you consider this a form of advocacy? And if you do, that's wonderful because you might do the same thing when it comes to the field of disability. Let's say that someone uses the word retarded. You might go, hey, you know what? That's not such a great word to use to describe the situation right now. And let's think of another word or let's use another word. If you do say something like that, that's pretty much advocacy for the people who might find the word retarded as a very offensive word. Historically, people with disabilities have received negative treatment from mainstream society. That's why we have disability-related majors. People use words to describe disabilities as put downs. It's just their tone or the way that they say things, such as, he's a veteran and he has PTSD. Or she has HIV, don't invite her to eat with us. Don't bother him, he has cerebral palsy. He's blind, he won't enjoy that party. He can't work, or they can't work, they're in wheelchairs. Okay? We redefine these terms into our everyday life without truly knowing the history behind these words. We've accepted these words into our everyday vocabulary. Words that we use commonly are moron, idiot, insane, imbecile, and retarded as well. Although they're all technically terms that originally refer to people with disabilities, the top four have kind of gone into our vocabulary and has been accepted. Retarded is still a dicey word right now, so we will try to avoid using that word when possible. Okay. Disability culture. As rehabilitation professionals, we choose to enter into a culture that is still struggling for equality in work, life, love, and the pursuit of happiness. Some words that are acceptable have negative connotations and perpetuate the ideas of a helpless person with a disability. As we enter into this field, we start learning the history of the population. And a class like Intro to Rehab will show you guys about the history of people with disabilities. We also start learning about what is considered respectful, and part of that would be a lecture like this. So is this true? Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Usually people will say, you know what, sticks and stones, I might get bruised or cut. Those things heal in a couple of months. However, words potentially could haunt you for the rest of your lives. You could be taking a shower and it just pops into your head these negative thoughts that you've heard before. So definitely it's something that's not true because words could actually be even more dangerous. So the media, they talk about, let's say, the movies. So there's a movie called Tropic Thunder, and there's a famous scene in it called Never Go Full Retard. There is a link, but if you want to, because this is going to be a YouTube link already, just type in Never Go Full Retard with Tropic Thunder, and you'll probably be able to see the link very easily. Okay, and it's a scene where two actors, one plays a character named Simple Jack, and they talk about his character and how there's a difference between going authentically, having a disability, as opposed to something that's more fantastical, like in a movie like Forrest Gump, where we really don't know what kind of disability the main character has. All right, another media area is music. So there's a famous song called Let's Get It Started by the Black Eyed Peas. I don't know if you know this or not, but the original version on the first version of the album, it was actually called Let's Get Retarded. And then they decided to re-record it to call it Let's Get It Started. Okay, you can search for both of them on YouTube very, very easily, so I encourage you guys to do that. But why do you think they re-recorded it? Let's discuss a little bit about it on the next slide. Uh, do you think they re-recorded it because they wanted to be respectful? Potentially. To make more money? Most likely. Who doesn't want to make more money? And to get more airplay? Definitely as well, because more airplay means more money as well. So potentially, the reason why is because they wanted to make more money. And that song was very, very successful. In that summer, I believe it was in a ton of commercials. And also, one thing that you need to realize, because you might not know about CDs, because we don't do CDs anymore, was that Walmart used to be one of the biggest CD seller stores. And they had said, we are not going to sell this album if you have this song on there. So they actually re-recorded it so that the newer version, which is Let's Get It Started, was selling there instead. And that's what they did. People first language, it's all about empowerment. It's all about respect. It brings to focus that people are people first before their disabilities. People with disabilities should not be viewed in a negative or mocking manner. How we see. Cicero says the eyes are the windows to the world. Do you agree with that? Basically, what Cicero is saying is that we are seeing people, seeing life through our eyes. So if we see through our eyes, we probably call it that way too. So, in these two pictures, what do you see? What sticks out? It definitely sticks out that there's a person with a leg brace and then canes, and then also a lady in a wheelchair. Is that bad that we notice these things? I don't think so. So what we want to talk about is how we react to those things. Okay. In the media, so this is a screenshot of a clip on CNN, and the title of this clip is Vietnam Vet Suffers PTSD, Murders Wife. Obviously, that sounds really sensational and kind of scary because a lot of people we know or we hear about, veterans especially, have developed PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, from their service time, right? So if we hear this, we suddenly associate everyone with PTSD with potential abilities to murder someone, like a loved one. If you hear about someone in your office who has PTSD, you're like, oh my gosh, are they going to kill me or kill someone in the office? Or I hope they don't go quote unquote postal on someone, right? So again, the media sensationalizes that because they want us to click on this clip so we can watch it. Why? Because there will be ads on this commercial or this clip as well. So that means that they're trying to make money doing it that way. And also they'll say that, real estate, when it comes to headlines and stuff, you can't just write people with disability, blah, blah, blah. It's just a very long word. So usually people tend to avoid terminology like that when they want to get something to catch your eye. All right, mixed messages. Again, we just saw a couple of them. Well, some people with disabilities use those words. Why can't we? And that's totally true. Some people do use disabling language, but that's okay. They might be describing themselves, which is totally fine. That's how they see it. Maybe they haven't really reached the therapy or the help that they needed, and that's the reason why. Or maybe they just prefer non-disabling or disabling language as well. That's totally fine, and that's how they choose to. But because typically, students who work in the field of disability don't have disabilities. You want to come into the community in the most respectful way possible because you're a helping person. And so that means if foundations of specific disabilities are saying, please don't use this language, please use this instead, we're going to want to adhere to those preferences because that's what they're saying within the community itself. We also see it in the media, like we just said. So does that mean that we should just agree with the media and that's it? No, again, the reason why is because they want clickbait, they want to make money through selling ads, or selling the newspaper or the magazine or whatever it is. So they're going to make it as sensational as possible so that you read it, and then or you buy it so that you can read it. We see in our textbooks as well, disabling language, and that's true because People First Language is not very old. It is a more recent thing, so maybe a book 10 years from here or 10 years ago might actually have words that are disabling. But you have to remember that textbooks usually uh, take a while before they actually get published and then get towards your hands as students. So these books are a little bit older usually. You're not going to see a book from 2018 per se, unless it's like a newer edition, but a new book might take a little bit longer. And why does it keep on changing? Because language evolves. We have words like selfie now, so obviously that means that our language is changing, and it's always changing. And so terminology preferences as well when it comes to language also changes too. So people in the field of disability, People First Language is very new, so it's evolving, and so it might change again in the near future. But again, currently, if the foundations of specific disabilities are asking us not to use certain language because they see it as a negative or has a negative connotation, then we want to respect that. And is it really that serious? Actually, yes. And the reason why it's serious because disability people with disabilities face a lot of discrimination, and part of that is because of the way that we describe people with disabilities. Although research says that there are many people with disabilities who want to work, they don't actually get the work because employers don't hire them. Why? Because employers might have a negative connotation when it comes to disability. Maybe they don't know anyone with disabilities, so they don't think that people with disabilities can actually be productive. But on the contrary, in research and everything like that, there are people with disabilities who can totally work in your office and be very successful. So is it really that serious? Yes, because we're talking about lots and lots of people who are not employed, who get unemployment checks or disability checks and then not actually work and contribute to the community that they actually want to contribute to. Passive terminology. So what does passive mean to you? Think about it for a second. Do you think about people who are not moving around? Maybe people who are laying down, people who might be sad. You might even say that they might be lazy. So if you are thinking about that when you think of the word passive, that means that there's a negative connotation. Do you want to be associated with these automatic definitions if you were a person with a disability? Probably not. So examples of passive terminology would be something like Katie is wheelchair bound or Kanye is confined to his bed. So you can use the word bound. Bound means to be tied up, right? So are people who are in wheelchairs tied down to their wheelchairs? No, not really. And then there's Kanye is confined to his bed, right? This person might have a disability that doesn't allow them to move a lot, but it doesn't mean that this person is like stuck in this room that's dark and drabby, and can't do anything. There are people who are actually non-mobile or not very physically active, but are still working. So again, we really want to encourage a more neutral or positive description when it comes to people with disabilities, especially if you're going to work in this field. So active terminology. Use active terminology such as Katie uses a wheelchair and Katie is a wheelchair user. So in both of these terms, you can hear how that's an active word, right? Uses. They're not bound to something. No, she's using her piece of assistive technology, this wheelchair, and it's helping her be active. Kanye has a physical disability, or Kanye has ALS, or Kanye has a mobility impairment. So with these, they're again active words, has, and it adequately describes what Kanye has, and it doesn't necessarily have a negative or a kind of like dreary, drab room and being confined to that bed kind of connotation that passive language has. And just to let you guys know, sometimes people who use wheelchairs, they only use it in public and they don't actually use it at home. There are people who are in wheelchairs but can actually walk, but maybe for very, very short periods of time. So that means that that's why they're using wheelchairs outside in public. And then some people also drag themselves around on the ground in their homes to be more physically active. Sensationalism. Be careful that you are not sensationalizing people with disabilities and making them feel like they have to surpass their disabilities. And that's something that's really important because we hear it all the time. Because the truth is, not all disabilities will have a positive outcome in various achievements no matter how much they try. So you don't want to sensationalize disability achievements because it can actually make other people feel really bad about themselves or their disability. Avoid describing people with disabilities as brave, incredible, or extraordinary, unless you're actually doing something really brave, incredible, or extraordinary, like saving someone's life or something like that. Okay? Otherwise, you don't want to connect the disability to any of the typical achievements that the person without a disability would also achieve. All right, so we can say something like you can be proud of someone's accomplishments, but just don't tie to the disability if it's not related. So something like, I'm so proud of Kesha for finishing her homework on time. Let's go to the movies and celebrate. Okay, that makes sense. You don't want to go because you know she's in a wheelchair, right? That is going to tie something in and saying that because she has a disability that she can't actually do homework, which is not true at all. And then there's misfortune and permanent pain. Avoid terms that describe an event as something permanent. Okay, don't want to use words like victim, afflicted with, suffering from, crippled by, because these words also have a very negative connotation to them. People can be victims of sexual abuse, but they're not victims for the rest of their lives, especially if they work with it or they deal with it. Okay, I know people who have been sexually assaulted, and it was a very traumatic and painful experience for them. But if they've gotten help, they're probably happier now. They might have a relationship with a person and it's a healthy one and stuff like that. So they're not victims anymore. Okay. They can also be in pain due to their disability or illness, but few are constantly in pain. Okay, so at that moment, they might be a victim or they might have been suffering from something, but it doesn't mean that 24 hours a day they are those people. Okay, so that's something that we also want to be aware of when we use words to describe people. So instead, let's try to use some more neutral terminology. So you want to use something like survivor of, living with, and has. It totally still tells the person, whether they're listening or the person you're actually talking to, that they have these things, right? We're not ignoring them. But it doesn't just have that negative connotation that suffering, victim, afflicted by, and stuff like that has. So examples would be Tori is a survivor of sexual assault. See, we know that she has been raped, right? But there's a positive forward-moving feeling towards that. And that, think about it, gets much more of a welcome when it comes to meeting other people, meeting an employer, although we usually don't talk about our sexual past, with employers. But Shane is living with PTSD, instead of saying Shane is suffering from PTSD, there is a negative and a neutral connotation to those two separate phrases. And then also Tony has ALS. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what is normal. Avoid using the word normal to mean people with no disability. Okay. If you ask 10 different people, will you have the same definition of normal? Probably not. Is your family normal? Probably not. Do you want to be normal? You might tell me, what is normal? What does that mean? Normal sounds boring. Normal means everything, and that's pretty accurate. And also, what is normal? A person who was born with a visual impairment, let's say who is blind, that is their normal because that's how they have always been, right? So can you really define normal in one way? No. And this is why we want to avoid using the word normal. So let's replace the word normal or the word regular. So when describing normal or regular people, use people without disabilities instead. I know it's a long word or 3 words, but it's respectful and it fills up your papers really fast. Use typical to describe everyday or regular situations. A typical classroom, a typical behavior, a common response. Instead of saying a normal classroom or normal behavior or a normal response. Instead, you're using words that don't necessarily require that kind of definition of what normal is, because typical just means something that's common or something that happens very often. So that is kind of like, the typical classroom, as in classrooms that have generally people without disabilities, right? Instead of saying a normal classroom. Okay, so now we're coming to people first language or person first language. So in this illustration, you'll see Eminem, this gentleman, and then you see his visual impairment, which is what his guide dog is all about. And then Eminem has a visual impairment. That's what happens when you put them together. Eminem is the person, so that's person first, and then the disability, visual impairment. So Eminem has a visual impairment. That's all it is when it comes to people first language. It is difficult though if you're not used to it. And it's like practicing a new language. So definitely, if you mess up, just correct yourself when you're talking. Focus on the person first. So you want to avoid terms like the handicapped or the disabled. Instead, you want to use preferred terms such as people with disabilities, because again, people is the first, and then disability is second, because people are important as people first. There's also wheelchair bound. You want to use maybe the words person who uses a wheelchair. Again, active terminology. Deaf person with a capital D versus deaf person with a lowercase d. There's actually two differences if you don't know about the deaf community. Capital D deaf community are people who actually don't think that they have a disability because they can still communicate through, let's say, sign language. They can still have very productive lives. There's really nothing that really hinders them. They're just speaking a different language, basically. So for them, they don't really see themselves as having a disability, so you can call them deaf, capital D person. The people first language doesn't necessarily carry on with that. But people with deaf, with a lowercase d, you might want to call them or refer to them as people with a hearing impairment. Okay. Mute basically means like no sound, right? So instead, we want to say something like nonverbal. That's the most common way to describe people who don't talk a lot or don't speak often or don't speak at all. Or someone with communication disorder. Again, it's a little bit more wordier, but it's still very acceptable at the moment because it's person first. And then the last phrase that we're talking about on the slide is suffers from cerebral palsy. You want to use a neutral term that still describes that person with cerebral palsy. I'm going to let you know that I know several people with cerebral palsy. They're not in pain. They're not suffering all day long. Some of them are not actually in pain at all for the majority of their time. So again, you want to know that so that you can use it properly. And this is the People First Language CDC poster. On the left is the full poster. The link that you click on the title will lead you to that. You can download it and then print it out if you want to. And on the right, the image is just a close-up or a detail of that little chart that you see inside that poster that tells you People First Language versus language to avoid. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about etiquette. Etiquette for non-wheelchair users, so that means people who don't use wheelchairs, some etiquette. So if you see them, a person in a wheelchair, offer them a handshake or a fist bump if you see them. Okay, if they cannot, open their hands out because of muscle issues, give them a fist bump really quickly. Treat them like everyone else that you would see, or you might even want to give them a hug. Speak to the person directly, not his or her or their assistant. Maintain eye contact with the person with in the wheelchair, and be at eye level if the conversation will last a while. And that's something that you might not realize is that a person who is sitting down in a wheelchair, usually they're a little bit lower than a person who's standing up. That requires them to look up a lot. And I don't know if you've ever had to look up for a while, but talking for 10 minutes with your head up can actually make your neck feel really, really uncomfortable. So if you're going to talk to them for a couple of minutes or a little bit longer than that, pull up a chair or maybe even squat next to them if it's a comfortable position for you, and then talk to them that way. Do not be afraid of using typical phrases like, I have to run along to someone in a wheelchair. They get it. It's just a phrase to say that I will see you later. Assume that the wheelchair is part of his, her, their body, which means don't lean or push it without permission. Again, this is now about consent. If you're talking about their assistive technology as part of their body or their assistive device is part of their body. So you don't want to put your legs on the wheels when you're sitting down or anything like that. And you don't want to grab their handles and then push them around without asking them or letting them know beforehand. And if you have a question, tactfully ask them. It's okay. You might start off with, hey, do you mind if I ask you a question about your wheelchair? Or, hey, do you mind me asking a little bit about me? I have some questions about your disability. Do you mind if I could ask you some of them? That's very respectful. Then they have the option of saying no. Okay? And the worst happens is that they say no. Usually the people with disabilities that I know, if they trust you, respect you and you respect them, they'll answer any questions you have. And then children may stare. It is part of curiosity. Talk to them afterwards so that they have answers to the questions. And this is a very pivotal one because a lot of children, when they see someone with a disability, they might stare and then their parents go, don't look, don't stare. That's impolite to people with disabilities. And it carries on into adulthood. So let's revisit again the idea of employment. Maybe your child will grow up to be an employer and then have people who come in with a disability to interview for a job position. A lot of people feel uncomfortable around people with disabilities because they don't know what to do. They are afraid that they might stare too hard at their disability or their assistive technology device or whatever, or they might not even think that people with disabilities can do anything because they don't really know anyone with disabilities. And that can be very detrimental to the population as a whole because, again, people with disabilities don't get hired because of discrimination. They think that they might scare people away or customers away, or they just can't do the work, or they might have to pay a lot of money to adjust their workstation so that they can work, all that type of stuff, when it really isn't that difficult to work with someone with a disability. It might actually even be more pleasant. So again, children may stare. It's part of the curiosity. Answer questions later on afterwards if you notice that they were staring and they looked a little interested or confused about something. All right, etiquette for communication with people with blindness or visual impairment. When entering or exiting a room, just announce yourself quickly. Don't try to sneak into a room quietly and then sneak out because most likely people can hear your footsteps or your breath. And it just becomes very awkward because they don't know who you are, they just know you're in the room. So for me, when I enter into a room or I see someone with a visual impairment that I want to say hi to, I'll say, hey, it's Christian, I'm coming into the room, or hi, it's Christian, I'm walking by you, I just want to say hi, and that's it. Or when you leave, you're going to say, I'm going to get out now, so I'll talk to you later. Bye, just to let them know so they know who it is, so it's not very awkward. When it comes to guiding, side-by-side walking, they can hold your arm. So you can see in the illustration in the PowerPoint. If you are going through some maybe narrow areas where two people side by side might not fit, you can have them also follow you. So that means just putting their hand on your shoulder so they're right behind you, and then you can guide them. And when it comes to walking, let them know if there's any steps coming up. And if there are, how many steps so they know, so they're aware of it. So you might say something that just want to let you know that there are 3 steps coming up and we're going to do it right now. Something like that so they're prepared and they understand so they don't trip and fall. When it comes to eating, let's say at a restaurant or someone's house, describe objects like it is on a clock. So let's say that if your glass of water is on the left side, that's about 9 o'clock. So you can say the glass of water is at 9 o'clock, and then your fork and knife and spoon are at 3 o'clock. Okay, and then your plate obviously is right in front of you, and maybe there are condiments like ketchup and mustard at 12 o'clock. That way, they can now figure out where everything is, and then they can help themselves to those things if they want to. That they don't depend on someone else to eat when they can fully eat themselves. Okay, or they're capable of eating themselves. Okay, object placement. Don't move furniture around because of safety issues. That means at an office or at someone's home or whatever, because usually people are trained to memorize where everything is. Okay, so if you move furniture around somewhere that they're used to and they don't know, they might actually potentially hurt themselves. They might run into a table, they might trip on something, they might hit their head on something. So if that does happen, just let them know that we'll be changing furniture and then this is the new one, and then we'll walk you through it so that they know and they're aware of what's going on. Okay, well, being proactive or assertive is probably one of the just general things that we want to emphasize in this lecture. As a person working in rehab, you have to be willing to step outside of your comfort zone for certain times, okay? Just like explaining something to a little child or whatever it is, it might be a little uncomfortable. You might not understand what to do, but once you do it, you'll be able to figure it out. Ask questions that are on your mind, but be tactful. Truly understand the holistic perspective on people. Understand that each person is unique. So 2 people who are blind will not necessarily be the same. Okay, it depends on their personality and exactly how they got blind or how they became blind and stuff like that that will make them all unique. Okay, and then be assertive, not aggressive. And the definition, the difference between those 2 definitions is that assertive is letting people know what's on your mind, but being respectful and thoughtful about the other person's feelings. Aggressive is letting people know what's on your mind, but you don't really care what other people think. And that can also have a kind of, it'll put up a defensive mode to the person you're talking to. They might get angry, they might yell back. But being assertive means letting them know what's on your mind, however, being respectful about their feelings and stuff like that. So there's a difference between those two, and I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. Thank you for going through this PowerPoint. I hope you enjoyed it and learned a little bit. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me, and we can go from there. Also, I just want to let you know that this PowerPoint, although it was created majorly by me, I did attend a National Rehabilitation Association conference in 2012, and I saw a PowerPoint presentation as well called Disable the Label, the Appropriate Use of Person First Language. And some of the stuff that they said were actually really interesting and I thought was really important. And I put some of that stuff in here. That PowerPoint and presentation was presented by Deanna Henderson, Mary Ann Joseph, and Mona Robinson. Okay? All right. Thanks a lot. Bye.